What's up, everyone? This is Pooch from Repkord, and we are going over the new CR30 X-Rail upgrade kit. So the first thing we need to do is check and make sure we've got everything. When you unpackage it, you should see checklist on the bag here. Linear rail from LDO, check. Next thing is our pre-drilled plate, and it's going to actually come in a prepaid return envelope, so if you don't want your old one when you swap this one out, send it back to us and hopefully we can reuse it. Got that, check. We've got a 3D printed spacer for the belt alignment, and our fastener set, which includes these sweet roll-in style T-nuts and some M3x8 screws. You should have 8 of these and 12 of these accordingly. We put one extra in each of them. You only need 7 and 11, but always good to have an extra in case we miscount. Okay, so as far as tools go for getting the job done, we're going to need an assortment of hex keys. You can either use the ones that came with your extra parts kit, or I'm using my ball driver set here. Those are handy if you've got them. You're going to want a pair of needle nose pliers. I've got a 4mm, a 3mm, a 2.5, a 2, and a 1mm hex key for all of the various screws that we're going to need to disassemble in the hot end there. But the first thing we need to do to get started is to relieve the tension on the belts by backing the steppers off. So I'm going to remove the screws holding this in place. You can see I've got the LDO motor upgrade kit. You may still have the stock kit on yours, but if it's stock, you're going to want to remove the 2 screws that are here and on each of the sides. The LDO kit only has these 2, so I'm doing that. And then there'll be the tensioner screw that holds it in here as well. So we're going to back that off. And then there is one inside here. And really what we're going for here, I'm going to take the tensioner screw all the way out so I can just slide this down. And you can see I've got my belt loose. Make sure it's the same on this side. And it helps to disconnect the steppers as well so that we're not potentially sending current back to the board while we're moving the rail around. Now at this point the steppers are actually disconnected, so it's not going to matter, and the belts really aren't tensioned around it either, but better safe than sorry. Alright. Okay, I'm going to start by taking off the belts from the block. You can see they just kind of fold over this and out of the little slot in the side. And if you want to be extra careful with stuff, a pair of zip ties, just keep track of how your belt routing goes. I just like to tuck them out of the way. They pretty clearly run over their pulleys, so just try to do clean work as best we can here. Good. Hold it behind that knob. Okay. And we're going to start with, this guy should be able to move pretty freely at this point. We're going to start with taking the cover for the hot end assembly off. That's these little guys here. That one's going to be a little bit longer because it's got your ground lead. They did a good job with the grounding on this, making sure everything is properly grounded. Okay, we can take that cowling off. And let's make sure we set our screws aside. Again, you can refer back to this video, but try to keep track of where each of your screws went because we're going to have to put them back where we got them from when we put this all back together. Okay, I'm going to take the little clamp off. Again with these little button head screws. And these guys, oh, that's fun. I'll get that later. Okay, move that out of the way. We're going to take off the end stop plate. Again, these are a bit longer as well, but it doesn't matter, we can use shorter ones. I'm going to take the end stop off of this little plate. That's with our smallest guy, 1 millimeter. Make sure you keep track of these little guys because they like to run and hide. Okay, we're not going to need this plate, so you can set that aside. Okay. Alright, now for the hot end, depending on when you got yours, they've made some modifications where there's actually 2 lock nuts on the back side of this. So I found the easiest way to go about this if you don't want to find a tiny wrench, because they don't send you a wrench that's that M3 nylock size, is just holding on to it with a pair of needle nose, and the torque on these is pretty tight, so you may actually need to go to a L style hex key so that you can actually just break the tension on it. Yeah, this ball driver's not going to cut it for that. Thankfully, I've got my hex key that came with the kit here. There we go. I can feel it turning now. Right tool for the job. Got it loose. There's also a lock washer that clamps it all down so that we really don't want any wiggle in the hot end, because you see there's a little bit of play here, and just not having that perpendicular to the rail here will really mess up your prints. So it's something you need to watch for when we're mounting that back on. I'll make that comment again when we get closer. I'm going to switch back over to my ball driver because I like it. Oops, wrong size. I put the other one right here. Okay. There's my nylock, and I'm getting that all the way out. Oh, I don't want that lock nut or lock washer as well. And I'm going to put these together so we don't lose them. Set them up like that, so we'll put them aside for when we put the hot end back on. Same thing for the other side. Okay, and I've got all of my hot end assembly free. Put that guy back together, put that aside. Alright, all of this should be loose now. We can just set it over here to the side gently and get this plate off. So same idea for the V-wheels. I'm just going to hold the nylock on the back side with a pair of needle nose or a pair of whatever pliers you want, and just take the top 2 off. And you can save these in your eccentric nut for another project. We will not need them for this because we are going linear. That's 1 and 2. Parts going everywhere. Get those off camera. And I'm just going to take these idler ones at the bottom off as well, so I have a clean plate. Again, if you want to send back your unused plate, you're not going to need this one. That'd be great. I'll put it to use. Find it a new home. You can throw it in that prepaid envelope. And maybe it will get drilled out and find a home on somebody else's upgrade kit in the future. Try to find as many opportunities to reuse stuff and minimize what's going in a landfill. But you know, maybe you're a part hoarder and you want to save spare parts. That's totally fine too. Wanted to give you guys the option, and it helps me out not having to just source and buy a bunch of new ones if you decide you don't need it. So we're going to take our drilled plate with the 4 holes for the linear rail. That's obviously going to replace the old one. You'll see it's the exact same plate that we had. We'll keep that there. Not quite ready for that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to open up our linear rail packaging. And what's really critical about linear rail, if you've never dealt with it before, many of you probably have and know what you're dealing with, but you're going to notice that there's these 2 kind of rubber bushings. Sometimes there's little clips, and that prevents the pillow block from sliding off the end. That's very important. Do not remove those until the very end. And the reason is that if this guy falls off the end of the rail, all the little tiny ball bearings that live inside the pillow block here can pop out, or even if they don't, when you try to slide it back on, it'll catch. This is a pretty precise fit in here, and it can catch on the end of this, and you'll spill bearings everywhere, which would be bad. The whole benefit of this is we want a nice, smooth, sliding, rigid surface that's going to do better for us than the V wheel. So leave those little stoppers on. So the goal here is we're going to bolt this to our 2020 extrusion here. This is where some 3D printed guides might come in handy. I'll put a link for these if you want to use these. Also, there's another trick you can do where basically at the very end you can just use a spacer, something of equal length. Just make sure that your distance, say, off of this base plate here on each side is even. And the whole idea behind that is so that we don't have like a little bit of a twist on the rail. That's a easy enough adjustment to make, but you know, do it right the first time and it'll make your life a little bit easier. So you can see right here the way that the profile for these guys that I printed out, thanks to Stuart over at Gridspace for sharing these. Just clips on here, and that just kind of allows you to see exactly where we want to get it. And then our plate is going to basically bolt right over onto the pillow block like that, and we'll have a nice new connection. So using the fasteners that we've got here, remember we've got these M3x8s and these roll-ins. So I'm going to take this off now that I've shown you what the goal is. Okay, and we're going to start by putting 7. And again, you should have an extra in here, but depending on when the kit was packed, you may have gotten an exact count. You only need 7, but hopefully, always good to have a spare. And this roll-in style is really sweet because it doesn't require us to take apart anything to get them into the channel of the extrusion. There's a little ball bearing detent that kind of holds it in place. So I'm just going to roll them in kind of from top to bottom. Sometimes it's handy to just use like a little hex key to kind of put it in the hole and slide it around where you need it. It doesn't really matter the orientation because we've got enough spacing. If you're, you know, neurotic and want to make sure you have all the holes off-centered to one side, you can certainly do that. But the idea is that we get all these holes lined up. That's one way to do it too. You can put it in there, roll it up. And right now, it doesn't matter. Just get them in the channel, and then we'll get our spacing right in just a second. So what I like to do is just roughly lay this guy on here. You know, make this gap doesn't really have. It can be off-centered one way or another because you're going to end here before you collide with this, but you know, have it centered, and then we're going to do every other hole here. So we're going to start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so we'll have equal spacing that way. So what I'm going to do is just kind of tip this down for reference, get that right, and then just roughly get my holes aligned where I want them. 2, 3. Set my pillow block out of the way. You can come all the way to the end. You're the buddy there. Okay, that looks pretty good. And what we can start to do is I'm just going to line up the first one, and using my either 2 or 2.5 millimeter hex key, I'm going to grab one of my M3x8s, and I'm going to start on the outside first, and I'm not going to tighten it all the way. I'm just going to get it so it's starting to thread. That's fine. And then one at a time, I'm going to be able to slide left to right to grab onto the next one, align the adjacent, put a screw in. Same thing. Let's not tighten everything right away, because that's how we're going to get these all lined up just right. Once we know we're threaded and everything, then we can go back and tighten everything. You can feel it threading. You should be able to look down the end of the hole and see that you're actually getting in there. And there's plenty of wiggle room to still slide the rail left to right when these aren't tightened fully. Let's see here. Next one's over here. And again, use a hex key to kind of put it through the hole to the T-nut and make sure it's lined up before you start threading. And it's a shallow enough hole, like again, so you can kind of look down and see where your threads are. And you feel them engage. That's good. Pour the next couple out. Looks like this guy kind of rolled out a little bit, but I was able to kind of poke it back in through the hole. That's fine. Just take it slow, easy going. 2 more. And last one. There we go. I've got engagement on all of them. Before I tighten them down, I'm just going to get it kind of left to right. I'm just using these top screws here kind of as reference. Again, you don't need to be exact. You could even be as far off as, say that, but, just give it a good visual. Make sure that's good. If you have an alignment tool, go ahead and snap it on now. That'll help us with the centering. The other thing you can do is if you didn't print these out or you don't want to, grab this is a 4 millimeter, and then use that as your gapping reference right here. So a 4 millimeter hex key will get you the same exact spacing that you need. Just lay it on that end piece. And again, if you feel like something's off, you can very easily loosen these up and snug it all down again in the future. So I'm just kind of working along here, using my guide to hold center. 1, 2, 3. Making sure we've got them all tightened. Everything stayed centered. That's great. You can see these are sliding back and forth, so I know everything's kind of in its place. That's good. So that's on there. Everything seems like it's moving smoothly. Okay, so next we're going to take our pre-drilled mount plate and we're going to screw it to the pillow block using these M3x8 screws. We got it lined up. 1. I like to go crisscross because I'm fancy, but it's not really like, I guess we could call it like tightening a lug nuts on a wheel, but it's not around a rotational axis, so it doesn't really matter. The main thing is just making sure your holes are all lining up. Should be pretty dead on coming from the machinist, but there may be like a little bit of a wiggle, so just make sure that you're seating on all of them before you tighten everything down all the way. And you can move left to right to check that we are, oh, I'm hitting the, I can take my bumpers out now because we're not going to fall off the end of the rail. And you can look here and here and on this side of these little C-channel mounts to make sure that you're basically running perpendicular to the rail. Again, we want to be squared up as best as possible. Here, we'll do a star pattern tighten for those of you who are triggered by such things not being done properly. And those are pretty snug on there, which is good. And that's looking good. It feels like it's sliding free. So now we put our hot end stuff back on. Hot end assembly, I guess we'll call all these little goodies. I'm going to start with the end stop switch. Remember how I told you don't need that additional plate anymore, so you're going to end up with that extra plate and some extra screws. They had pre-tapped, because this is the same plate they used for the Ender 6, they have pre-tapped holes here for the end stop as it mounted on the Ender 6 that we're going to be able to use now, given that we're higher up and off of the extrusion more than we were with the V wheels. And again, this is our baby hex, the 1 mil, or 1.5. Is it 1.5 or 1? I'm gonna have to look it up. So 1, 2. Okay, we've got our end stop on there. Make sure we slide over, we're triggering. Get our old view wheel out of the way. And we are. That looks good. And we can kind of fold our wires down out of the way. And then we're going to do our hot end again, going backwards. So you remember we've got the longer screws with the lock washers and the nylocks. So I'm going to take off the nylock for right now. And that nylock just adds a little bit of extra clamp down so we don't have any wiggle, but it's kind of finicky getting at retightened properly because these are threaded posts that we're going into, so it's kind of like double locking plus the lock washer. So what I do is I'll thread it through with my finger on the back side of the post until I can feel the thread start to poke through. And oh, went too far, my finger wasn't lined up. So before it starts to protrude through, just after actually, I'm going to take the lock nut on the back side, just holding it in place with my finger and grabbing my 2mm hex key. I'm going to start to thread it on until I feel it. And again, I want to hold this tight against the back side of the plate so I get that locking force that I need. And I'm just going to leave it at that until I get the other one on. And then we'll make sure that it's squared up perpendicular and lock it down. Again, making sure you still have your lock washer on there. Thread it through with your finger on the back side of the hole until you start to just feel it poke through. Then take your nylock on the back side, hold it in place until it just starts to twist. You'll feel that nylon engage. Okay, now at that point, I'm going to take my needle nose, and again, this is kind of fun, holding it in place so that the nylock can't spin, and I'm going to tighten all of it at the same time, and watching carefully that I'm staying perpendicular here to this X-rail axis. We're going to eyeball it just for a second, and then we'll take it back down to the bed and make sure that we are indeed perpendicular. And again, if we want to be extra safe, you may want to grab the standard hex key that's got the L so we can get just that little extra bit of torque that we need to make sure that it's really locked on there. You can see here I was able to kind of wiggle it because I hadn't tightened this one down all the way. I'm looking at it, making sure that I'm perpendicular, and then I do my final tighten, or hopefully final tighten. After we check it, we may have to redo it. So I'm going to bring it back down. That's looking pretty dang good. You're going to need to get down underneath, and if you have a small T-square, you might want to lay it there using a reference edge or whatever. You know, get it as close as you can. Save yourself some potential headache in the future. And then we're going to lay the cowling back over and get those button head screws back in place, starting with the longer one going through the ground loop, and then it's going to go through the post of the top right of the fan shroud assembly, I guess we'll call that. Why not? Sometimes it helps if you have your hex key holding it in place. We're going to make sure our wires are where they need to be inside there. And again, I'm just going to not fully tighten. I'm just going to leave it loose so I've got a little bit of play and everything. Again, if you start by putting it on the hex key and holding it on with your finger, you're going to have a lot better of a time not potentially losing the screws. And these are little guys, so they have a tendency to want to potentially cross thread if you're not careful. So make sure that you're going into the hole properly. Yeah, not all the way just yet. I'm going to do the far side one down here at the bottom right. Good, and last one here. Okay, now at this point, I'm gonna make sure that everything here appears to be squared up the way that it should be. You may need to back out some screws a little bit to just give yourself the proper alignment. We're going to cinch it all down. Okay. Last thing, put our little clamp up here to hold our PTFE or cap tube in place. Again, you can use this came with the shorter screw. I think these are M3x5s if I'm not mistaken. Very tiny. Nope, see, I just lost one. Let's try that again. Again, set it on there, put it in where it's going so it helps hold it in place. Make sure your holes are lined up. There we go. Ah! Let's try to get down closer so we can see everything aligned. There we go. Third time's a charm. One. And Again, make sure you're feeling that engage into the hole properly, that you're not cross-threading it. It should not require a lot of force to thread, so if you feel like it's taking too much force, try to back it out and see if you're threading it properly. All right, that's good. All right, next thing we got to do is hook the belts back up, and in order to do that, we are going to need our handy dandy 3D printed spacer bracket right here. And the purpose of this is when we put this X-rail on, it lifted the whole plate up off of the extrusion higher than it is in a stock configuration. And so if we were to just put the belts back on as is, they would be not running parallel to the extrusion anymore. And in fact, they're still going to require that we flip the little grommets over so that they're sticking out the top rather than back down through the bottom. You can see if I put it in like this, how off angle we become as we get closer to this. It's going to cause some binding. And so in order to get that all spaced properly, we're going to give ourselves as much slack as possible on these belts. Okay, keeping in mind our belt routing. And we are going to start on the left side here. You're going to take your spacer, and I like to go with the flat printed side against the plate because I know that that's about as close to flat as it can be, but it's certainly good enough for what we need to do here. And I'm just going to line them in there like that on one side, and then again I should have enough slack ideally that I'm going to work behind here. And again, I'm going up from underneath through there like this. Okay. Out of the pulley, same thing. The grommets, or the crimps, I guess we'll call them, as they come through. And again, it really helps if you bring your steppers down, or if you release the belts as far as you can. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go on one side. I'm leaving a lot of space here so that I've got room to work. We're coming up from underneath and we're rolling around the post with the belt here like that. And then on the bottom we're going to do the same thing the other way, so the belt is kind of inward, and then it's going to roll into this little slot beneath, and these are going to stick out on the top like that, but that is no big deal. Same thing on the other side. Again, making it so that the flat side is up, and you're making sure that you're in the right channel. So this is your top belt on this side, this is your bottom belt on this side, and roll it into the channel accordingly. There we go. And now we can start to cinch this up so that it's held tight to the back of the plate. It will sit, the reason that it's the dog bone shape that it is so that it'll sit above those nylocks that I was telling you about nice and cleanly. And we can start to add tension back to the belt system. So I'm just manually sliding my steppers back up into place to kind of tighten things. Now as you go here, just go slow because you're going to find that the belt is going to jump off the pulley. So just watch your routing here back on the pulleys on the rear, and sometimes they'll have the tendency to just kind of jump to the outer flange of the pulley. That's fine. You can always loosen the belt and put it back in place. Okay, last step is we're going to get our steppers seated back into place, plug them back in, apply tension back to the belts. Basically what we're going for is just equal tension on both sides. In the case of these LDOs, I found that perfect tension seems to be right at the point where you can just put the screw on the front face of it right here back into place. And again, making sure that you're tightened enough so that we're not cross-threading. There we go. Should go nice and easy. Helps if you almost over-tighten it a little bit and then let the little mount plate go back into tension here. Clamp that guy down. And I can feel when I squeeze these guys together that I get kind of a low bass string pluck tone to it. And again, making sure that you're around the pulleys as you slide around, because sometimes these have the tendency to slip off when they're loosened. So just go slow, make sure everything's in place. Tension feels good there. Last things to check. I'm going to go manual here for a second. You're going to want to get down here, get down low, bring it all the way down. We're going to have to do some adjustments to the end stop so that you can get all the way down to the bed, but you should be able to get a pretty good visual here with the belt brought all the way down, that you're roughly the correct height you should be. Everything looks perpendicular to the belt plane. And again, our spacing looks nice and consistent. And you're going to inspect your belts and make sure that when you move left to right, that you've got these cinched up high and low enough so that basically you're not getting any belt binding as you get to the extremes on either side. So you can see here I'm a little bit low. So to compensate for that, I'll just literally just push this up a hair, and that'll get me to where I need to be. And that's it. Again, if you have any problems, feel free to contact us at support@repkord.com. If you need anything, we're here to help. Thanks again for watching. Happy printing.